So imagine sneaking into your worst enemy's room in the dead of night. You see them lying in bed, you point a weapon, and you pull the trigger.
Right.
You flee the scene, completely convinced you've just committed the ultimate crime. But then, a few days later, the autopsy reveals this shocking detail. Your enemy actually suffered a massive, fatal heart attack an hour before you even got there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And legally speaking, you did not commit homicide.
Yeah, you might be looking at a very serious attempted murder charge or, maybe abusing a corpse. But homicide is entirely off the table.
Because they were already dead.
Exactly. The fundamental rule of this area of law is absolute. You literally cannot kill someone who is already dead.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. We are taking a massive stack of legal sources today and stripping away the shiny, dramatic courtroom veneer you see on television.
Which is usually highly inaccurate, by the way.
Oh, totally. Our mission today is to look at how the justice system actually works when a human life is taken. And I want to make a promise to you, the listener, right up front. We are going to focus on explaining everything using only simple, everyday English.
I love that. No dusty Latin phrases.
Right, no dusty legal terms. If we do hit a piece of jargon, we will translate it immediately, and we'll recap often so you never get lost in the details.
Because it is a lot of details. Homicide law is arguably the most complex area of the legal system, mainly because it attempts to quantify the unquantifiable.
Like human emotions and split-second choices.
Right. You're dealing with the infinite variables of human thought and behavior at the exact millisecond everything went wrong.
It's wild. Like another crazy hook from the sources until recently. If someone died a year and 2 days after you hurt them, you couldn't be charged with killing them.
The year-and-a-day rule. Yeah, that's a fascinating one.
We'll definitely get into that. But before we touch concepts like murder or manslaughter, we have to establish a baseline. What actually counts as a homicide?
Well, at its core, the definition is surprisingly simple. Homicide is just the umbrella term for the killing of a living human being by another living human being.
That's the baseline.
Yeah, that is the foundational requirement. It requires a living victim, which is, why your opening scenario with a heart attack plays out the way it does.
But proving someone caused a death isn't always as simple as matching a bullet to a gun. The sources spend a massive amount of time on this hurdle called causation.
Yeah, causation is huge.
And the law requires prosecutors to prove two completely different types of causation to hold someone responsible. The first one is actual cause. So is this like setting up a chain of physical dominoes? Like if I'm the domino that starts the fall, am I the actual cause?
Yes, that's exactly it. The legal test here is often called but for causation.
Mm-hmm.
So the jury asks, but for the defendant's actions, would the victim have died when and how they did?
Okay.
If the answer is no, then you are the actual cause. You set the lethal forces in motion.
Even if I'm not in the room when the final domino falls?
Oh, absolutely. The text gives the classic example of a rig trap. If you rig a shotgun to a tripwire in an abandoned cabin, and then someone breaks in 3 days later and triggers it, you are the actual cause of that death.
Because I pushed the first domino.
Right, exactly.
Well, what if the person is already standing on the edge of a cliff, medically speaking? Like, let's say I get into a minor altercation with someone and hit them with a club.
Okay.
I don't hit them hard enough to kill a healthy person, but it turns out they have a severe, completely undiagnosed heart condition, and the physical shock of the hit triggers a fatal cardiac arrest.
Oh, the pre-existing condition rule?
Yeah, did I cause their death, or did their bad heart cause it?
You take your victim as you find them. That is a bedrock principle in the law. Even if their weak heart heavily contributed to the outcome, your physical action was the substantial factor that triggered the fatal event.
So I'm still on the hook.
You remain the actual cause, yes. You even remain the actual cause in incredibly bizarre simultaneous scenarios.
What do you mean by simultaneous?
Imagine two completely unconnected people with totally different motives shoot the exact same victim at the exact same millisecond.
Wait, really? And either bullet would have been fatal on its own?
Right. In that hyper-specific scenario, the law dictates that both shooters are the actual cause. You don't get a free pass just because someone else happened to be committing the exact same crime at the same time.
That makes sense. But physical dominoes aren't enough, right? Because if we just use pure physical cause and effect, we'd be throwing people in jail for absolute freak accidents. So the law had to invent a fairness filter.
And that filter is what we call proximate cause, or legal cause. That's the second hurdle.
Let's unpack proximate cause.
So once we know your actions physically led to the death, the law asks a sort of philosophical question. Is it fair and just to hold you responsible?
And how do they measure fairness?
The measuring stick is foreseeability. Basically, was this death a natural, predictable result of what you did?
Think about this if you're sitting on a jury, though. Predictable is a really fuzzy concept.
It definitely can be.
Let me throw a hypothetical at you to test the boundaries of this fairness filter. Let's say I injure someone, and they have to go to the hospital for emergency surgery.
Okay, pretty standard so far.
But while they are on the operating table, the surgeon completely botches the procedure. They make a massive mistake, and the victim dies. Is that my fault? The doctor is the one who made the lethal error.
The law actually keeps you on the hook for that.
Wait, really? Even though the doctor messed up?
Yeah, medical mistakes, while deeply unfortunate, are considered a foreseeable consequence of putting someone in a situation where they require emergency trauma surgery.
Oh, because I forced them into that high-risk environment.
Exactly. The chain of responsibility connecting you to the death remains unbroken.
Okay, let's push that even further. I tie someone to a tree in the middle of an open field. Out of nowhere, a completely freak lightning strike hits the tree and kills them. I put them there, but I didn't, summon the lightning.
Right, and that is where the chain breaks. A freak lightning strike is an abnormal, completely unforeseeable act of nature.
So it's too weird to predict.
Yes. It is so wildly out of the ordinary that it severs the link between your action and the result. The law decides it would be fundamentally unjust to hold you responsible for a bizarre weather event, even if your underlying action of tying them up was terrible.
Which gives us the perfect context for understanding that truly bizarre historical footnote we mentioned earlier, the year-and-a-day rule.
Oh, yes, from the common law.
Centuries ago, if you fatally injured someone in a fight, but they somehow managed to cling to life for a year and 2 days before finally dying, you could not be charged with homicide. The legal timer literally just ran out.
Which sounds crazy now, but we have to view that through the lens of history. Think about the state of medical science in the 14th or 15th centuries.
Bloodletting and leeches.
Exactly. If someone took a severe blow to the head in a tavern and died 8 months later, doctors had absolutely no way to definitively prove that the original punch caused the death.
It could have been an infection or a new injury or the plague.
Right. The foreseeability filter became too murky. There were too many intervening variables over the course of a year, so the courts just drew an arbitrary line in the sand.
But most states have abolished that now, right?
Yes, because as forensic science and medical pathology advanced, we gained the ability to prove causation much further out. You can track a traumatic brain injury's effects over decades now.
Okay, let's do a frequent recap number 1. I promised simple English summaries, so let's lock this in.
Sounds good.
If you're listening and trying to determine if a homicide occurred, you need 2 things. First, the attacker's actions must be the actual physical domino that started the fall. And second, the resulting death has to be a logical, predictable outcome of that domino falling, not an insane, unforeseeable lightning strike.
That perfectly covers the physical reality. It establishes that a homicide happened and who caused it.
But a physical act alone doesn't put you in prison for life.
No, it doesn't. The entire system now pivots, because once you prove someone caused a death, we have to look at what was going on inside the perpetrator's head at the exact moment they acted.
The mind of the crime.
Exactly. To charge someone with the most severe form of homicide, common law murder, you have to prove they acted with something called malice aforethought.
Okay, let's pause and unpack this jargon, because malice aforethought sounds like a scheming villain in an old English novel rubbing his hands together in a dark room. What does that actually mean in simple English?
It is an incredibly misleading phrase, honestly.
Yeah.
Legally speaking, it doesn't necessarily mean you harbored a deep, malicious hatred for the victim, and it doesn't even mean you thought about it a lot beforehand.
It doesn't.
No. Malice aforethought is just an umbrella term for 4 very specific, highly dangerous mindsets. If you possessed any one of these 4 mindsets at the moment you caused the death, the law considers it murder.
Okay, let's walk through this spectrum. What's the first flavor of malice?
The first one is the most universally understood, the direct intent to kill. You aimed a weapon, you pulled the trigger, your conscious objective was to end a human life.
That's straightforward. But wait, what if my conscious objective wasn't to kill them? Let's say I'm furious at someone and I hit them over the head with a heavy baseball bat.
Okay.
My goal is just to break their jaw. I just want to inflict pain, not kill them. But they suffer a fractured skull and die. How does the law treat that?
That falls directly into the second mindset, the intent to do serious bodily harm.
So the law treats them the same.
Yes. The justice system equates the intent to severely injure with the intent to kill. Because if you purposefully unleash that level of devastating physical force, you are accepting the very high probability that the person might die, therefore murder.
Got it. Which brings us to the third category, and this one uses another incredibly dramatic legal term, a depraved heart.
Also known as reckless indifference to human life.
What does that mean?
This is where you didn't want to kill anyone. You didn't even want to hurt anyone. But you engaged in an action so incredibly dangerous and so wildly reckless that you demonstrated a total disregard for whether people lived or died.
The source material has a vivid, honestly terrifying example of this. Imagine someone thinks it would be a funny prank to drop a heavy bowling ball off a highway overpass into fast-moving traffic below.
Right. A classic depraved heart scenario.
They aren't targeting a specific driver. They genuinely don't want anyone to die. They just want to see a crash. But the ball goes through a windshield and a driver is killed.
That is the textbook definition of depraved heart murder.
Yeah.
You knew the risk of death was astronomical. You knew it was completely unjustifiable. And you did it anyway.
So extreme recklessness essentially mimics a desire to kill.
Exactly. And it's not just for cartoonish examples like a bowling ball. Think about extreme reckless driving.
Like drunk driving.
Yeah, if someone gets heavily intoxicated and decides to drive 90 miles an hour the wrong way down a curved highway, that level of recklessness can trigger a depraved heart murder charge if a fatal collision occurs.
Okay, let's hit frequent recap number 2. We have 3 mindsets so far. Wanting to kill someone, wanting to severely injure someone, and acting with insane recklessness.
Right, and the fourth mindset is where the legal architecture gets truly fascinating.
Oh yeah, the intent to commit a felony. This introduces the infamous felony murder rule.
Yes, it does.
And under this doctrine, you can be charged with murder even if killing someone was an absolute 100% accident, which feels crazy.
The philosophy here is incredibly punitive. The justice system realized that certain crimes are so inherently terrifying and volatile that if you choose to commit them, you are essentially lighting a fuse.
And the law doesn't care if you meant for the bomb to go off.
Exactly. It punishes you for lighting the fuse in the first place. You accept the blame for any blood that gets spilled.
But this doesn't apply to white-collar crimes, right? Like if I commit felony tax evasion and the IRS auditor gets so stressed they have a fatal heart attack, I'm not getting charged with felony murder.
No. The rule only applies to inherently dangerous felonies. Law students memorize the classic 5 using the acronym BARK.
Like a dog bark.
Yeah, BARRK. Burglary, arson, rape, robbery, and kidnapping. The law recognizes that the risk of violence and death is baked right into the DNA of those specific actions.
And choosing to commit one of those BR crimes creates a terrifying web of responsibility. The sources call it vicarious liability.
Yes, it ties everyone involved together.
Let me set up a scenario. Imagine you and I agree to rob a convenience store.
Okay.
I am just the lookout. I stand by the front door totally unarmed. You go to the register, you get incredibly nervous, your hand shakes, and your gun goes off entirely by accident, tragically killing the
Oh,
clerk.
terrible situation.
Right. But we both get charged with murder, even though I was just standing by the door and even though you never intended to pull the trigger.
Yep. Because you operated as a team to commit a highly dangerous felony. As a cohesive team, you foreseeably created the chaotic environment that led to the death.
So the law holds everyone equally responsible.
The law holds everyone involved equally responsible for the consequences of the shared enterprise. And interestingly, from a procedural standpoint, the underlying robbery charge actually merges into the murder charge.
Oh, because of double jeopardy. You can't be punished twice for the exact same offense.
Exactly. Since the robbery is the foundational element that proves the murder, you get punished for the felony murder, which effectively absorbs the robbery.
Okay, let me throw a major wrench into this machinery because there is a fascinating exception in the text. It's called the red line doctrine.
Ah, yes. The red line doctrine.
Let's go back to our convenience store robbery. We're robbing the store, but this time the store owner is armed. The owner shoots back in self-defense, and he hits you, my partner in crime. You die on the floor of the store. The store owner's bullet killed you. Because we were committing a felony. Am I, the surviving lookout, charged with your murder?
You'd think the blanket felony murder rule would apply, but this is where the law draws a hard, logical line. Under the red line doctrine, you are not charged with your co-felon's murder.
Really? Why does the chain break there? I lit the fuse by robbing the store.
It comes down to the classification of the store owner's action. When a victim or a police officer shoots a robber in genuine self-defense, the law classifies that as a justifiable homicide.
Because they had a legal right to protect their life.
Precisely. Because the actual killing itself was legally justified, the prosecution cannot then take that justified act and use it as the foundational basis to charge the surviving robber with an unjustified murder. It creates a logical paradox.
Oh, that makes total sense. Okay, frequent recap number 3. Let's hear it. Synthesizing all of this, if you commit a highly dangerous crime like robbery or arson and someone accidentally dies, the law treats it just like you intended to kill them, unless the person who dies is your partner, shot by a cop, or a victim in self-defense.
That is a perfect plain English summary.
Great. So to be guilty of murder under the old common law, you either intended to kill, intended to cause severe harm, acted with depraved indifference, or someone died while you were committing a B-arc felony.
Right. But modern law realized that treating all of these exactly the same was too blunt of an instrument.
So they chopped it up into degrees, first-degree and second-degree murder. What elevates a killing to first degree?
The key dividing line is premeditation. First-degree murder requires that the defendant actually reflected on the idea of killing beforehand and planned it out.
It wasn't just a spontaneous explosion of violence.
Right. They took time to consciously process the thought, I am going to end this person's life.
Even if that reflection only lasted for like a few quiet minutes before acting.
Yes. As long as there was sufficient time to weigh the decision. Additionally, statutes automatically classify certain heinous methods like poisoning, torture, or lying in wait for an ambush as first-degree murder, regardless of how long the planning took.
And second-degree murder?
Second-degree murder catches the remaining malice crimes. So the depraved heart bowling ball drop, or an intentional killing that erupted without any prior planning, that would be second degree.
Okay, but this all assumes a level of cold calculation or blatant disregard. What happens when we factor in extreme human emotion?
Now we're getting into manslaughter territory.
Because what if you intentionally kill someone, but you had a profoundly devastating reason to be absolutely furious at the time? Does the law demand robotic perfection, or does it account for the fact that human beings occasionally just snap?
The system has a specific release valve for this reality, known as voluntary manslaughter. This is a mechanism where an intentional murder is legally reduced or mitigated down to manslaughter because the killing occurred in the heat of passion.
But you can't just claim you were having a bad day and lost your temper.
Oh, definitely not.
The threshold is incredibly high. The sources talk about the requirement for adequate provocation, and they explicitly note that mere words or taunts, no matter how incredibly cruel or insulting they are almost never enough to legally justify flying into a homicidal rage.
Right. The provocation has to be profound. It has to be something that would cause a hypothetical, reasonable person to momentarily lose complete control of their rational mind.
Like what?
Discovering a spouse in the act of adultery is the classic historical example. Or being subjected to a severe, ongoing physical battery. The emotion has to completely overwhelm reason.
But there is a massive catch to this mitigation, the cooling off rule.
Yes, the timer.
If I catch someone doing something horrible and I instantly react and kill them in the room, that might be voluntary manslaughter. But what if the provocation happens and I don't have a weapon? So I walk out of the house, get in my truck, drive 10 minutes to my friend's house, borrow a gun, and drive back to kill them.
That walk to the truck and that drive changes everything.
Really? Even if I'm still furious?
Yes. The law asks, did you have enough time between the provocation and the killing to physically and emotionally calm down? If a reasonable person would have had time to process their emotions and realize what they were about to do, the legal timer resets.
Wow. So I lose the heat of passion events.
You lose it completely. It does not matter if you personally were still boiling with rage. The sudden explosion of emotion has passed, and you are now executing a calculated decision. You are back to murder.
The timeline dictates the intent. Okay, so if voluntary manslaughter is an intentional killing driven by sudden emotion, what about involuntary manslaughter? By definition, that has to cover unintentional deaths.
Yes, it covers fatal accidents, but not just everyday tragedies. It applies to accidents caused by gross carelessness or unlawful acts. The first major pathway is criminal negligence.
Which is vastly different from, like, bumping into someone on the sidewalk and them tragically tripping and hitting their head.
Far different. Criminal negligence is a gross, severe deviation from how a normal, responsible person would act.
Give me an example of that.
A tragic but common example is a parent who refuses to seek basic medical care for a severely ill child, resulting in the child's death. It is an extreme, unjustifiable failure to act when you have a clear duty to do so.
Okay, the other pathway to involuntary manslaughter is committing an unlawful act that isn't severe enough to trigger the felony murder rule we talked about earlier.
Right, the non-BR praps.
And the sources divide these unlawful acts into two Latin categories, malum in se and malum prohibitum. Let's translate those concepts into simple English.
Sure, malum in se translates roughly to acts that are inherently wrong or evil all on their own. Assault is a perfect example.
Okay.
If you commit a minor misdemeanor assault, say, you punch someone in a bar fight and they fall awkwardly, hit their head, and die. You didn't intend to kill them. An assault isn't a BRK felony, but because the underlying act of punching them was inherently wrong, you're looking at involuntary manslaughter.
Because the starting point was an intrinsically bad action.
Exactly.
But contrast that with malum prohibitum. These are actions that are only wrong because society drafted a rule to maintain order, like a parking violation, failing to renew a business license, driving with an expired vehicle registration.
Exactly the right distinction.
So think about this scenario. I am driving my car, and my registration expired 2 months ago. A child darts out from between two parked cars right in front of me.
Oh, man.
I hit the brakes, but it's a completely unavoidable accident, and the child dies. I was committing an unlawful act by driving an unregistered car. Does my expired paperwork turn that tragic accident into involuntary manslaughter?
It does not. The law requires a logical, causal link between the violation and the death. An expired piece of paper does not cause a car crash.
That makes sense.
Yeah, for a paperwork crime or a malum prohibitum violation to result in a manslaughter charge, the prosecution would have to prove you were also acting with extreme criminal negligence at the time, like texting while driving 50 miles over the speed limit. The administrative violation alone carries no homicidal weight.
All right, let's bring all these complex pieces together into a final framework. Frequent recap number 4.
The big summary. Let's do it.
First-degree murder involves premeditation and planning. Second-degree murder is an intentional killing without planning, or an act of extreme, depraved recklessness.
Right.
Voluntary manslaughter is an intentional killing mitigated by a sudden, overwhelming emotional explosion with absolutely no time to cool off. And involuntary manslaughter is an unintentional, fatal accident caused by severe criminal negligence or an inherently wrong misdemeanor.
When you look at the entire landscape we've explored today, from the physical dominoes of actual cause to the foreseeability of proximate cause to the rigid boundaries of the cooling-off period, you realize what the justice system is actually doing.
What's that?
The entire structure of homicide law is a desperately complex, retrospective attempt to reconstruct human consciousness. It is a system designed to measure the exact weight of a person's intent at the single worst moment of their life.
And it leaves me with one final, incredibly provocative thought to chew on.
Oh.
We talked about how voluntary manslaughter depends on what would inflame a quote-unquote reasonable person. It relies on the idea of an average emotional response.
The heat of passion.
Right. But when a case goes to trial, it is placed in the hands of a jury. So how does a jury of 12 completely different people with entirely different backgrounds, different tempers, different life experiences, and different breaking points somehow come together to decide what a reasonable emotional reaction to severe trauma actually looks like?
That is the profound tension at the heart of the law. The legal code demands neat categories and objective standards, but human nature constantly resists being placed into a box. Can we ever truly standardize human passion and anger? Probably not.
It is a question that ensures the courtroom will always be a theater of human complexity. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of homicide law. We will be right back here next time, taking the world's most complex, dense subjects and breaking them down so you can understand exactly how they work. See you then.